personally encouraged the co-founder of Sony to open its first European factory here in Wales. That decision wasn't simply an investment. It was an act of faith in the ingenuity and spirit of this nation.
They said Diana took her secrets to the grave. They were wrong. When Princess Anne opened that unmarked envelope, her blood ran cold. A DNA test, Diana's name, and another name that shouldn't exist. The palace had buried this for decades, but the truth was about to explode. What Anne discovered next didn't just shock the royal family, it threatened to destroy the monarchy forever. Diana's final secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same.
With that relationship and that control and the fear by the UK tabloids, it's a toxic environment. But I will always be there for him. I will always be there for my family.
The envelope came through the standard royal postal system, mixed in with the usual correspondence that crosses her desk daily. Reports, briefings, invitations, thank you notes. After decades of royal service, Anne had developed a routine for handling these documents. Most got passed to her private secretary. Some required a quick signature. Very few demanded her personal attention. But this particular envelope was different from the moment she picked it up. There was no official crest embossed on the paper, no return address, no identifying marks that would indicate where it came from or who sent it. Instead, a deep red wax seal pressed into the back caught her eye. The design was unfamiliar, not matching any of the official seals she had seen throughout her years in the palace. For a brief moment, she considered setting it aside for her staff to handle. It would have been the sensible thing to do, the protocol she normally followed, but something made her hesitate. Her instinct told her to open it herself. She broke the wax seal cleanly and pulled out a single sheet of paper. What she saw made her freeze in place. The document had the clinical header of a private laboratory. Beneath that, in clear professional typeface, were words that would haunt her for days to come. DNA test results. Her eyes scanned down the page, searching for context, for explanation, for anything that would make sense of what she was looking at. The name Diana Spencer appeared on the document. Below it was another name, one Anne had never encountered in any official royal capacity. It was completely foreign to palace records, to family history, to everything she knew about Diana's life. The conclusion section at the bottom was written in precise scientific language that left no room for misinterpretation. The test confirmed a genetic link between Diana and this unknown individual. The probability percentages were overwhelming. This was not speculation or rumor. It was documented scientific fact. Anne read the conclusion 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood something. Maybe there was an error in the testing process. Maybe the names had been mixed up with another case. Maybe this was some elaborate hoax designed to create chaos within the family. But the more she examined the document, the more real it became. Every detail was professional and thorough. The laboratory was legitimate and well respected. The testing methodology was sound. There was no escaping what the paper in her hands was telling her. Her mind immediately went to questions. Who had commissioned this test? Who had access to Diana's genetic material years after her death? Why would someone go through the trouble of conducting this analysis now, decades later? And most importantly, why send the results to her? Anne was not typically the person who dealt with sensitive family matters. Charles held that role as the heir and now king. Yet someone had deliberately chosen her as the recipient of this information. The implications began to sink in slowly at first, then with increasing weight. The British monarchy is built on bloodlines. The entire system of succession, of titles, of legitimacy depends on clear genetic lineage. Every child born into the royal family is documented, announced, and placed within the careful structure of inheritance. That is how the institution has survived for over 1,000 years. Clear rules, clear lines, clear succession. This document challenged all of that. If Diana had a genetic connection to someone outside the known family tree, it raised questions that went far beyond personal family drama. This was constitutional territory. It touched on matters of legitimacy, succession rights, and the very foundation of how the monarchy operates. Anne understood that what she held in her hands was not just a piece of paper. It was potential dynamite that could explode the careful order the royal family had maintained for generations. She thought back to Diana herself, trying to remember if there had been signs she missed. Diana had always been somewhat enigmatic, especially in her later years. There were moments during family gatherings when she would make cryptic remarks that others dismissed as emotional or dramatic. Anne had been guilty of that dismissal too. Diana had a reputation for being sensitive, for feeling trapped by the constraints of royal life. People often attributed her more mysterious comments to that sense of confinement rather than to any actual hidden truth. But now, those memories took on new significance. Anne recalled specific conversations where Diana had spoken in vague terms about things she could not say publicly. At the time, Anne assumed she was talking about her troubled marriage to Charles, or perhaps about the difficulties of living under constant media scrutiny. The press had been merciless toward Diana, analysing her every move, her every expression, her every choice. It made sense that she would feel unable to speak freely about her life. Yet there had been other moments too. Times when Diana's eyes carried a weight that seemed to go deeper than marital problems or media pressure. A sadness that felt more profound than what the public knew about. Anne remembered one particular afternoon when Diana had said something about truth being too dangerous to speak aloud. The comment had seemed melodramatic then. Now it felt like a warning that no one had heeded. Anne carefully folded the DNA report and placed it in a locked drawer of her private desk. But even as she turned the key, she knew that locking it away would not make it disappear. The truth was now lodged in her mind, impossible to ignore. The palace around her suddenly felt different. The familiar halls and rooms that had been her home for so long now seemed to hold secrets she had never noticed before. The walls themselves felt like they were watching, waiting to see what she would do with this information. She looked out the window toward the palace gardens. The carefully manicured lawns and precisely trimmed hedges reflected the order that the royal family projected to the world. Everything in its place, everything controlled and maintained. But beneath that surface, Anne now understood, lay something far more complicated. The beauty outside her window did nothing to calm the growing sense of unease inside her. Anne had always prided herself on being steady and reliable. While other members of the family courted controversy or struggled with their roles, she had remained consistent. She showed up, she did the work. She asked for nothing in return except to be left alone to serve in her own quiet way. That steadiness had been her greatest strength throughout her life, but this situation was testing her in ways she had never anticipated. This was not a matter she could simply handle through duty and discipline. This was something that demanded a choice. She could lock that report away and pretend she never saw it. She could maintain the status quo and protect the institution she had served faithfully for decades. Or she could follow the trail and discover what Diana had hidden, even if it meant disrupting everything the monarchy represented. For the first time in her life, Princess Anne realized that doing the right thing might mean betraying the very institution she had spent her entire life defending. Anne could not simply leave things as they were. The DNA report had opened a door she could not close, and her mind kept returning to Diana. Not the Diana of public memory, the glamorous princess photographed at charity events and state dinners, but the private Diana who had confided in her during quieter moments. The woman who had seemed to carry secrets too heavy to share. Diana had been a prolific writer. Her diaries were legendary within the family, though few had ever been allowed to read them. She guarded those journals fiercely, treating them as sacred space where she could express thoughts she dared not speak aloud. Anne had been granted glimpses into some of those pages during rare moments of vulnerability between them. At the time, certain passages had seemed overly dramatic or poetic. Diana had a tendency toward intense language, describing her life in the palace as a prison, referring to the institution as the machine that ground people down. Anne had chalked this up to Diana's emotional nature and the very real pressure she faced from relentless media attention. It was easy to dismiss her more cryptic statements as the words of someone overwhelmed by circumstances. But now, with the DNA report fresh in her mind, Anne began to reconsider everything Diana had written and said. What if those dramatic statements had not been exaggerations at all? What if Diana had been trying to communicate something specific, something dangerous that she could not say directly? One particular phrase kept coming back to Anne. Diana had written in one of her diary entries about truth being too dangerous to speak aloud. She had mentioned keeping certain things safe, leaving a map for someone who would understand one day. At the time, Anne had nodded politely and assumed Diana was being metaphorical, Perhaps she meant emotional truths about her marriage. Perhaps she was talking about keeping records of Charles's relationship with Camilla. The family already knew about that situation, even if they did not discuss it openly. But the word maps stuck in Anne's mind now. What if Diana had not been speaking? Metaphorically. What if she had literally left clues, a trail of information that someone could follow if they knew where to look? Anne remembered Diana mentioning letters she had written to trusted friends, documents she had tucked away in various places. She had spoken of this with an odd sort of urgency, as though she was preparing for a possibility she hoped would never come to pass. Anne decided she needed to look deeper into Diana's personal archives. Much of Diana's estate had been handled by her family after her death, with some items going to her sons William and Harry. But there were other materials that had been stored at Althorpe, the Spencer family home. Anne reached out to trusted contacts who had access to those archives, people who understood discretion and would not ask unnecessary questions. What came back to her over the following days was both fascinating and disturbing. Diana's letters to certain confidants contained veiled references that took on new meaning in light of the DNA report. She had written to one friend about a betrayal that cut deeper than infidelity, using language that suggested something beyond the obvious problems in her marriage. In another letter, she mentioned blood itself, as though the concept of family lineage had become complicated in ways she could not explain openly. One margin note in a diary entry particularly stood out. Diana had scribbled hastily, "When they are ready, they will understand." Anne had seen this note years ago and assumed it referred to William and Harry, that Diana was leaving wisdom for her sons to discover as they matured. But now that assumption seemed too simple. What if they referred to someone else entirely? What if Diana had been leaving breadcrumbs for whoever would eventually uncover the truth she could not reveal herself? Anne then turned her attention to Diana's travel records. She instructed her most discreet aide to pull together a timeline of Diana's movements during the late 1980s and early 1990s. This had to be done carefully, without raising suspicions within the palace. The official records showed the expected pattern of royal engagements, charity visits, and state functions. But there were gaps, brief periods where Diana had disappeared from the public schedule with vague explanations about personal time or private retreats. These absences had never seemed particularly notable before. Members of the royal family occasionally took private time away from their duties. It was understood and accepted. But when Anne began cross-referencing these gaps with other information she was gathering, a pattern emerged. Several of Diana's unexplained absences coincided with trips to Europe, specifically to smaller clinics and private facilities far from the attention of the British press. Anne's aide, working with extreme discretion, managed to obtain old records from one particular clinic in a small European town. The facility had a reputation for serving high-profile clients who valued privacy above all else. The records were fragmentary, many having been lost or destroyed over the years, but what remained was enough to send a chill through Anne. There was a notation of a birth during one of the time frames when Diana had been absent from England. The attending physician's name appeared in the records, and it was a name Anne recognised. He had been a palace doctor years ago, someone who had resigned suddenly with minimal explanation. At the time, his departure had been explained as a personal decision, a desire to return to private practice. No one had questioned it further because palace staff came and went regularly. But now his sudden resignation looked different. It looked like someone leaving before questions could be asked. It looked like a carefully managed exit designed to prevent any connection being drawn between his work at the palace and his work at that private European clinic. Anne pulled up everything she could find about this doctor. He had died several years ago, so there was no possibility of questioning him directly. But his career records showed a long history of working with royal families across Europe, not just the British monarchy. He specialised in obstetrics and had built a reputation for absolute discretion, the kind of doctor wealthy and powerful people trusted with their most sensitive medical needs. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture Anne found increasingly difficult to deny. Diana had made trips to Europe during specific timeframes. A palace doctor with expertise in childbirth had been present at a private clinic during one of those trips. Records from that clinic showed a birth, but with deliberate gaps in the documentation. No father listed. No clear information about what happened to the child afterward. Just enough of a paper trail to prove something had occurred, but not enough to provide a complete story. Anne felt her heart racing as she considered what this meant. For years, there had been whispers in the darker corners of royal gossip about Diana having a third child. These rumors had been dismissed by everyone in the family as tabloid fantasy, the kind of sensational story that sold magazines but had no basis in reality. Anne herself had rejected these rumors whenever she heard them, considering them cruel inventions designed to hurt Diana's memory. But what if those rumors had not been entirely invented? What if they had originated from some kernel of truth that had leaked out despite everyone's best efforts to contain it? Tabloids got things wrong constantly, exaggerating and distorting facts beyond recognition. But sometimes, buried within their sensational stories, there were fragments of actual information. Someone had known something, even if they did not have the full picture. Anne thought about the timing of Diana's death. She had died in a car accident in Paris in August of 1997, at a moment when she seemed to be building a new life for herself away from the constraints of the royal family. She had been more outspoken in her final years, giving interviews that made the palace uncomfortable, speaking more openly about her struggles and her truth. There had been speculation at the time that she was planning to reveal even more, that she had information she was preparing to share with the world. What if that information had been about this child? What if Diana had been working up the courage to finally acknowledge a truth she had been forced to hide for years? Her death had cut short whatever plans she might have had, and in the chaos that followed that tragic night in Paris, any secrets she had been carrying died with her. Or so everyone had assumed. But Diana had been too smart to leave everything to chance. She had known how dangerous her position was, how much the palace feared losing control of its carefully managed narrative. So she had left clues. Breadcrumbs scattered through diaries, and letters and cryptic conversations. Insurance in case something happened to her before she could speak the truth herself. She had trusted that eventually someone would follow the trail and piece together what she could not say aloud. Anne realized with growing certainty that she was that someone. Diana had left this trail knowing that if anyone in the family had the integrity and the courage to follow it, it would be Anne. Not Charles, who was too invested in maintaining his position. Not the Queen, who had been gone now, but who had always put the institution above everything else. Anne had always been the dependable one, the one who did what was right, even when it was difficult. Diana must have known that Anne would not turn away from the truth once she found it. The weight of this realization settled over Anne like a heavy cloak. She had been chosen for this task, whether she wanted it or not. The DNA report, the diary entries, the medical records, all of it pointed toward a truth that had been systematically buried. Someone with significant power and resources had worked very hard to erase any evidence of this child's existence. Records had been altered or destroyed. People who knew too much had been relocated or silenced. It was a cover-up that required coordination and authority at the highest levels. Anne's thoughts turned inevitably to her brother Charles. He would have been in a position to know about this. As Diana's husband and as heir to the throne, he would have been informed if something this significant had occurred. The question was not whether he knew, but what role he had played in hiding it. Anne knew she needed to confront Charles directly. There was no way around it. The evidence she had gathered pointed too clearly toward a cover-up that would have required his knowledge and consent. She could not move forward without understanding exactly what her brother had known and when he had known it. The conversation would be difficult, potentially explosive, but it had to happen. She found him in his private study one evening, alone and reviewing papers by the firelight. The setting felt almost theatrical, as though the room itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Anne entered without the usual formalities, closing the door behind her. She carried the DNA report in her hand, no longer hidden away in a locked drawer. The time for secrecy between them was over. Charles looked up as she approached, and something in his expression told her he already sensed why she was there. Perhaps he had been expecting this conversation for years, knowing that eventually someone would start asking questions. Anne placed the document on the desk in front of him without saying a word. She watched his face carefully, searching for any sign of surprise or confusion. What she saw instead made her stomach drop. There was no shock in his eyes, no bewilderment or demand for explanation. Instead, there was a flicker of recognition, followed by something that looked almost like resignation. He stared at the paper for a long moment without touching it, as though the physical act of picking it up would make everything too real. When he finally met her gaze again, the truth was already written across his face before he spoke a single word. Anne asked him directly what he knew about the DNA results and the child they indicated. She kept her voice steady, refusing to let emotion cloud the moment. This needed to be clear and factual. Charles did not try to deflect or deny. He simply sat back in his chair and released a long, measured breath that seemed to carry decades of burden. Then, in a tone so controlled it was almost unsettling, he confirmed what Anne had begun to suspect. Yes, there had been a child. Yes, he had known about it. Yes, the truth had been deliberately concealed after Diana's death. He spoke about it as though discussing a policy decision rather than a human life. There had been a meeting. He explained in the confused days following Diana's funeral. The key members of the family and their most trusted advisors had gathered privately to discuss what to do with certain information that had come to light. Diana had left behind documents that revealed the existence of this child born years earlier during one of her trips abroad. The group had faced an impossible choice, or so Charles framed it. If they acknowledged the child publicly, it would create a constitutional crisis. Questions about legitimacy and succession would dominate the conversation. The monarchy, already reeling from Diana's death and the public's grief, might not survive another massive scandal. They had just begun to stabilize the situation, to manage the narrative around Diana's legacy. Introducing a secret child into that volatile mix could have toppled everything. So they had made a decision. The child's existence would be erased from official records. Anyone who knew about it would be persuaded or pressured into silence. Medical documents would be sealed or destroyed. The child himself would be relocated and provided for financially, but kept far away from anything connected to the royal family. It had been, in Charles's view, a necessary act to preserve the institution. Anne felt anger rising in her chest as she listened to him rationalize what they had done. She interrupted him, her voice sharp now, asking how he could possibly justify erasing a child's entire identity. This was not some abstract problem to be managed. This was Diana's child, a living person with rights and a connection to the family. Charles met her anger with calm detachment. He spoke about duty and sacrifice, about how the monarchy had always required difficult choices that ordinary people would never understand. He reminded Anne of the chaos of the 1990s, the constant scandals, the divorces, the public criticism of the family. The institution had been on shaky ground. One more revelation, especially one this explosive, could have been the final blow. They had acted to protect not just themselves, but the entire system of constitutional monarchy that Britain depended upon. In his mind, it was not cruelty, but cold pragmatism. Anne pressed him further. She wanted to know who else had been involved in this decision, who had participated in the meetings where they decided to erase a child from history. Charles hesitated, clearly uncomfortable naming names, but Anne would not let it go. She needed to understand the full scope of what had been done and who bore responsibility. Finally, Charles admitted that the decision had not been his alone. Several senior royals had been consulted, advisors had weighed in, and Camilla had known as well. The mention of Camilla's name sent a new shock through Anne. She had suspected that Charles knew, but the idea that Camilla had been privy to this secret for all these years changed the equation entirely. Camilla had not even been officially part of the family at that time, yet she had been trusted with information this sensitive. Anne immediately understood the implications. If Camilla knew, then she had been using that knowledge all along as leverage, as insurance, as a weapon to be deployed if she ever needed it. Anne left Charles sitting in his study and went directly to find Camilla. There was no point in waiting or planning the confrontation carefully. Her anger and sense of betrayal drove her forward. She found Camilla in one of the private sitting rooms, looking entirely composed and unsurprised by Anne's sudden appearance. It was as though she had been expecting this moment as well. Anne did not waste time with pleasantries. She laid out what she knew about the day report, about Diana's hidden child, about the cover-up that had followed Diana's death. She told Camilla that Charles had confirmed everything and had mentioned that Camilla had been aware of the secret for years. Anne demanded to know what role Camilla had played and why she had remained silent. Camilla's response was calculated and cold. She did not deny anything. Instead, she confirmed that yes, she had known about Diana's child for a very long time. She explained that information in the palace was never truly secret, just carefully managed. She had pieced together the truth through conversations with Charles, through access to documents, through her own quiet investigations over the years. While others in the family pretended not to know or actively tried to forget, Camilla had made it her business to understand exactly what leverage existed and who held it. She spoke about the secret as though it were a chess piece, something to be positioned strategically rather than a matter of human consequence. Camilla explained that her survival within the royal system had depended on being indispensable. And part of being indispensable meant knowing things that others did not. The knowledge of Diana's hidden child had been perhaps the most valuable piece of information she possessed. It made her untouchable in a way that titles and ceremonies never could. Anne accused her of turning a child's life into currency, of manipulating the situation for personal gain. Camilla did not flinch. She countered by saying that Anne had always been naive about how power actually worked within the family. The romantic notion of duty and service was fine for public consumption, but the reality was far more ruthless. Everyone in the palace used whatever advantages they had. Camilla had simply been better at it than most. Then Camilla shifted the conversation in a way that made Anne's blood run cold. She suggested that Anne should be careful about pursuing this truth too aggressively. There were other secrets within the family, she said, secrets that touched on Anne's own life and relationships. Things that had been kept private out of courtesy but could easily become public if the wrong people decided to make them so. The implication was clear. If Anne pushed too hard on the Diana situation, other uncomfortable truths might suddenly find their way into the open. But Camilla was not finished. She leaned forward slightly and told Anne something that stopped her cold. The child they were discussing was not some distant figure living in obscurity on another continent. He was closer than Anne might think. Camilla did not elaborate, did not provide details, but the way she said it suggested that Diana's son had been nearby all along, perhaps even moving in circles that occasionally intersected with the royal family without anyone realizing who he truly was. Anne left the conversation shaken. The revelation that this person existed somewhere within reach, rather than safely hidden away across the world, changed everything. It meant he could emerge at any moment. It meant the secret was far more precarious than she had imagined. And it meant that Camilla had been sitting on this knowledge, watching and waiting, ready to use it, if the situation ever called for it. Anne returned to her private quarters and sat in silence for a long time. She had confronted both Charles and Camilla, and what she had learned was worse than she had feared. This was not a simple cover-up born from panic in the immediate aftermath of Diana's death. This was a calculated, ongoing deception that multiple people had actively maintained for decades. They had not merely hidden the truth, they had weaponized it, using it as leverage and protection for their own positions within the family. But knowing the truth and knowing what to do with it were two different things. Anne now understood that somewhere out there was a person who carried Diana's blood, who had lived his entire life in deliberate obscurity, who had been denied his identity and his heritage because the institution had deemed him too dangerous to acknowledge. The question was whether Anne had the courage to find him and to give Diana's truth the voice it had been denied for so long. She thought about Diana again, about the woman who had tried so hard to be heard, who had left clues and breadcrumbs hoping someone would eventually follow them. Diana had trusted that the truth would eventually surface, that someone in the family would care enough to dig beneath the carefully maintained facade. Anne realized she had a choice to make. She could walk away, protect the institution, and let the secret remain buried. Or she could honor Diana's memory by finding the person who had been erased and giving him the acknowledgement he deserved. The decision would define everything that came next. Anne understood that making her promise to Diana's son meant crossing a line she could never uncross. For her entire life, she had operated within the careful boundaries of royal protocol. She had been the steady one, the reliable one, the princess who never caused trouble or made headlines for the wrong reasons. But this situation demanded something different from her. It demanded courage that went beyond simply showing up and doing her duty. It demanded that she stand against the very institution she had spent decades serving. The decision did not come easily. She spent sleepless nights weighing her options, considering every possible consequence. If she went public with this information, the fallout would be catastrophic. the monarchy would face its most serious legitimacy crisis in modern history. Charles's position as king would be questioned. The line of succession, so carefully maintained and documented, would be thrown into chaos. Constitutional experts would debate endlessly about what this revelation meant for the crown itself. But every time Anne considered backing away, she thought about Diana's face. She remembered the woman who had tried so hard to be heard, who had fought against the machine that wanted to control every aspect of her life. Diana had died before she could tell her full story, before she could acknowledge the child she had been forced to hide. Anne had made a promise, not just to this man sitting before her, but to Diana's memory. She could not break that promise, no matter what it cost her. Anne began making arrangements for a press briefing. She did not seek approval from Charles or consult with palace advisors. This was her decision alone, made independently of the institutional structures that normally governed royal communications. When word got out that she was planning to address the media, panic spread through the palace. Charles tried to reach her, wanting to discuss what she was planning. Camilla sent messages through intermediaries, subtle reminders of the leverage she held, veiled threats about what might happen if Anne proceeded. But Anne had moved beyond the reach of their influence. She had seen too much, learned too much, and made a promise that mattered more than any threat they could deliver. The press briefing was scheduled at a location outside palace grounds, ensuring that no one could physically prevent it from happening. International media received invitations, and speculation immediately went into overdrive. Why was Princess Anne calling a press conference? What could she possibly have to announce that required this unusual format? The day of the briefing arrived with global media presence. Journalists from every major news organization crowded into the venue, cameras positioned to capture every moment. The room fell completely silent when Anne entered with Diana's son walking beside her. That image alone would be replayed thousands of times in the hours and days to come. The resemblance between the man and Diana was striking enough that even before Anne spoke a word, people began to understand that something extraordinary was happening. Anne approached the microphone with a calm that surprised even herself. Her voice was steady as she began to speak, explaining that she had uncovered information about Diana that had been deliberately hidden from the public. She confirmed the existence of DNA test results that established a genetic link between Diana and the man standing beside her. She spoke about the years of concealment, about records that had been altered or destroyed, about a systematic effort to erase this person from history. Then she introduced him, not as a scandal or a secret, but as Diana's son, a living person who had been denied his identity and his connection to his mother for his entire life. The room erupted immediately. Journalists shouted questions, cameras flashed constantly, and the energy in the space became electric. This was not a rumor or speculation. This was a member of the royal family confirming something that would fundamentally alter how the world viewed the monarchy. News of Anne's announcement spread instantly across the globe. Within minutes, every major news channel had interrupted regular programming to broadcast her words. Social media platforms exploded with reactions ranging from shock to anger to demands for accountability. In Parliament, emergency discussions began about the constitutional implications. Across the Commonwealth nations, leaders scrambled to understand what this meant for their relationship with the British Crown. Inside the palace, the response was immediate chaos. Camilla's carefully constructed influence, built on secrets and leverage, began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Charles found himself unable to contain the situation through the usual methods of palace control. The institution he had worked to protect was now facing questions about its fundamental legitimacy. How could the monarchy claim to represent continuity and tradition when it had deliberately hidden the existence of a royal child? Diana's son then stepped forward to make his own statement. His words were brief but powerful. He spoke about growing up in the shadows, about knowing his identity but being unable to claim it, about watching his half-brothers live the life he had been denied. He thanked Anne for her courage and made it clear that while he had no interest in titles or positions within the royal hierarchy, he would no longer accept being erased from history. His existence was a fact, and facts could no longer be buried by institutional power. The questions that followed were relentless, but Anne had said everything she needed to say. She had kept her promise to Diana. The truth that had been locked away for decades was now public knowledge. The carefully maintained image of the royal family, built on centuries of tradition and control, had been shattered in a single afternoon. The world would never look at the monarchy the same way again, and Anne understood that she had forever changed her own place within it. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, and the initial frenzy began to settle into longer-term analysis and debate, one question remained unanswered. What would happen now? Diana's son existed in public knowledge, but his role and his future were undefined. The monarchy stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between clinging to old patterns of denial or finding a way to acknowledge a truth it had spent decades trying to hide.